we're going to move on to the legislative section, and I'd like to introduce Cindy Sherrans. Well, let's give her a warm up.
My two main goals are to help you read legislation and understand what you're looking at when you're looking at a bill and its impact in changing the law that then causes the classroom and the school to be implementing something such as Common Core standards and related curriculum, which also, I want to say, we could also call what we call Common Core college and career ready. What we're experiencing right now did not initially come from the Maryland legislature, from your schools or your county board of education. It came from Congress giving money to the executive branch to fund these programs with enticements for the local boards of education. They came through our governor. He or she applies for those grants. That is why initially and through many stages of this, no law was made to outright adopt Common Core so that the public would have known that that's what's happening. That is a normal process in the state of Maryland and in many states. It will not change unless we address the law being changed through our legislature. Maryland State Department of Education is in the executive branch. They answer to the governor, and that money is funneled to them, and then MSDE gives approval or disapproval for that money to go down to the locals, LEAs, local education agency, which in our state is a county board of education or the city. Notice that the Maryland General Assembly isn't in that path of authority, and that's where people get representation. So again, if you look at MSDE, it answers to the governor, and then the governor, regarding a budget, it gives a budget proposal to the governor. The governor then presents the budget to the General Assembly. The General Assembly has a lot of power, or a little bit of power with the budget, but they cannot change the money allotted to the schools. So they pass the budget. It has to still have that education money in there. It goes to MSDE, and they have control of the funds to the local. Maryland Constitution, it's available online. Everyone should have a copy. It's revised every 2 years or so, depending on amendments. I'll tell you those later. And then the Maryland Code, which is our state law made by the legislature, and then COMAR, which is the regulations made by the Maryland State Department of Education or any other executive.
What is COMAR?
Thank you. Code of Maryland Regulations. So those are not made by the legislature where the people can have direct input and elect their representatives. They're made by the agencies who answer to the governor. There is a quasi-public process for input, but it really is usually very little effect. It's kind of a done deal. It's really just semantics and logistics. I'm sure there are some changes. But that COMAR is where much of what MSDE then regulates regarding the implementation of certain standards and certain policies within the classroom. And that's where you'll find language that restricts the local boards of education even more in a lot of ways regarding testing and everything. All right, just to quickly connect the use of the Maryland legislature with these various reforms that were done along with Common Core. Changes that they make in state law included such things as Common Core, which we are all familiar with sufficiently for this. Early Learning Challenge, which is that the state of Maryland, MSDE, was given permission by the legislature and a directive to apply for federal grant monies for prior to kindergarten age. It's basically ultimately birth to kindergarten age. Birth to workplace, P20, that was actually originally done here in Maryland through an executive order by the governor, not a piece of legislation. And then it was in later years made by legislation to give it strength, as it's important to take these things from an executive order, which again is not legislative, representative of the people, into being more cemented into law. It makes it harder to change and just has more strength. Instructional digital conversion, I think that's more a Baltimore County term I'm less familiar with. If you want to say anything.
But it's every county, it's just that's our term.
Yes,
stat.
yes,
We call it
yes. Universal design for learning, that's a methodology, sounds very good in trying to have methods of teaching children with varying learning abilities and methods. But that process and concept is infused within the College and Career Ready standards in a way to try to address every child in their varying ways of thinking. And it's actually the computerized assessments that will draw that out, that will take the children on paths to try to, again, create different ways of thinking for each child, whether they need it or not, to get to information. College and career readiness, I've spoken about that. Maryland Safe and Supportive Schools, again, say anything?
Yeah, that's one of the surveys. It's on our website. There's information about this one.
And then the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. That, for instance, was in 2010, that was handled by a law in our legislature to create, and that is one of, especially those four or 5 large categories that were required by these various federal grants, the ARRA with Race to the Top and the rest of the stimulus money. Let's see if there were some others. So when a legislator in Annapolis is faced with a bill that has a certain title, it may just seem like another area of law that needs to be addressed in an appropriate way. They're not necessarily connecting the dots. We now need to be even better at connecting the dots for them. And our legislature, he who rules makes the rules. So there really are many more Democratic Party legislators than there are Republican Party legislators. And so I'm not saying good or bad one way or another, but the bills that get passed are mostly the ones that the Democratic Party plans to pass. When you're talking to a legislator of either party, understand what kind of power you do or do not have, and that the person standing before you does or does not have in the position they're in. It's just helpful to understand that. It helps you understand why we get the results we do. In the Maryland General Assembly, which, by the way, meets every winter for 90 days, early January to mid-April, in Annapolis, the committees read the bill, hear the bills, have a hearing before it actually gets dealt with on the floor of the House or the Senate. So the committees are where the people participate and where the real work begins on pulling apart the bill language and exposing it and understanding what it's going to do. It's our time for input. So in the Senate, there's one committee that hears education bills. It's the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. In the House, it's 2 committees, Appropriations and Ways and Means. So when we go to the website, then you know that those are the committees that you're going to most likely be testifying before.
Cindy, would you say that to a large part, that once it gets out of committee, it's almost a done deal? That really
It's a done deal.
Right.
We really have to get to these committees.
Right. The committee hearings, thank you, are the important time for citizen input. And what happens is a bill will be introduced at various times during the legislative session. Once that's introduced on the floor of the Senate or House, it is assigned to a committee within that chamber, House or Senate. That committee then has a hearing date that they post. And there are ways, because here are the rules, who knew? And each, this is for the Senate and House, and each of these chambers makes their own rules. But the leadership is are the people who make the rules. And again, remember that balance of power in every committee and certainly in each chamber, the House and Senate. It is the Democratic Party that holds all the leadership positions. They change these rules, and even though these are written, The chairperson of each committee actually makes the rules impromptu and is able to do that in each committee.
I'm amazed there's
So,
no education committee in the House of Delegates.
it's appropriations and ways and means. So those are the committees that handle it.
The
Here's the
Education
bills.
Committee is the subcommittee underneath Ways and Means and Appropriations. There's an Education Subcommittee.
The Maryland State Department of Education actually controls curriculum policy and instructional policy. And in our Maryland law, it states that, and it states that the local boards of education must implement the curriculum that aligns with the state curriculum policy. They can choose their own materials. Each board, each county chooses their own instructional materials, but they must align with the state curriculum. And in fact, that's also in COMAR regulations. Maryland Law Library online. It has a page called Gateway to Maryland Law. All right, so you see this is Gateway to Maryland Law. There are two things you want to look for on here. Current code and rules. You see that? That is Maryland law that is made by the legislature. And when you go to this, you see the education article. That is where you will find Maryland law on education, although there are also related things in other parts of the law. Now, what I'd like to show you for a minute is the structure of that law, because you see there are divisions 1, 2, 3, 4, and they have title numbers within them. You can only deal with that by clicking on one at a time. There are categories within each one of those that you need to go ahead and look through. And each one of those has many different links. But if you understand what the big categories are, then you can see local school administration, establishment of county boards of education, State Department of Education. You're going to find different authority that each one of those has under there. Public schools, teachers and other personnel. If you want to find the Maryland Longitudinal Data System, who would know where you find it? Well, this is why it's important to, at some point, go through all these sections. See Title 24, Miscellaneous Education Agencies. That is where the, let's see, which one is that in? Title 24. That is where you'll find the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. Miscellaneous Education Agencies. Look at subtitle number 7. That's the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. Go in there, definitions, the system center, the reporting requirements, the governing board, the reporting requirements of the governing board, the regulations and compliance with data requirements and implementation schedule. So you can see, it's important to see all these things are there. When you are faced with a bill, you're going to need to know what it refers to and what it's changing. So COMAR regulations, those are made by the Maryland State Department of Education for education in pre-K through 12, it's Title 13A. Higher education is Title 13B. So everything that's COMAR regulation made by MSDE is in Title 13A. So we're back on the Gateway to Maryland Law. At the Maryland Law Library, I told you I use the current code and rules from Westlaw. Now to find COMAR regulations, we just scroll down further on the page. Administrative materials, it has Maryland Register and Code of Maryland Regulations, COMAR, and Search COMAR. I go to the whole code. Search option number 3, access through table of contents. Again, that way you are able to see what is in COMAR, and I'm going to go now down to 13A. So that's the State Board of Education. Now we're on the internet page of the COMAR 13A. So I said the number 4 subtitle is the specific subjects. So if I take you to mathematics, this is state regulations. The bottom, G, curriculum documents. Consistent with education article, so that was the education article in the statute law created by the legislature. Education article, section 4110, annotated Code of Maryland, Each local school system shall provide mathematics curriculum documents for the elementary and secondary schools under its jurisdiction. That is one of the few real roles of the local Board of Education. You basically have 3 roles. This is, each local will provide curriculum documents to elementary and secondary schools under its jurisdiction that include the content standards described in section C through F of this regulation, which they've just done here, are aligned with what? Can you read it? Maryland College and Career Ready Standards as developed by the Maryland State Department of Ed in collaboration with the local school system. Right there. That is state level control rather than local control. So the local schools pick the curriculum materials, but the standards and the policies come down from the State Department of Education. So that's where you have to affect it by legislation. Some useful links, I just showed you some ways to get to things. Also, MSDE is online. Peruse through their website, poke all around. Maryland State Department of Education, MSDE, all of those will get you to a link that a search result that you'll be able to use. This is the Maryland General Assembly website shown first, and the Maryland Law Library, I just showed you the code and rules, and then the Maryland Constitution. Just do a search, you'll get that online. All right, here is a bill. This is just an example of one bill. I'm going to bring up a few more, hopefully, as far as some content and the way that they are not what they appear to be, and how we really need to pay attention to the language that's in there. But what I'd like to do here is show you some things that are typical in a bill. This has been given a number. This started in the House. A bill, if it passes committee, by the way, it will go to the chamber, the floor of the chamber that it came from, the House or the Senate. Gets voted on there. If it passes there, it gets sent to the other chamber. Goes through the same committee process there and the floor of the House. If it passes both houses, then it goes to the governor for his or her signature. Then it becomes law, and it's usually designed to be implemented on certain dates after the legislative session. October 1st is one, I think July 1st is one, or any other date that it might state. There are certain constitutional mandates that are a requirement. Okay, so this is the sponsor, and when the bill was actually introduced officially onto the floor of the chamber and the committee that it was assigned to. Now, every bill in the state of Maryland can only be about one subject, and it must have a title that reflects what is within the bill. But it's laughable, as one has already demonstrated, yes. But still, that is useful to note. There's the title. Regarding the content of this bill right now, I'm not really trying to deal with that. All right, this first paragraph, and it may be pages long, maybe several paragraphs perhaps, but it is the summary of what the bill does. For those of us who don't yet know the law, if we are not super sleuths when reading that language, we might make certain assumptions and not realize the impact that that bill is having. For instance, some of the bills say, for authorizing a certain agency to do such and such. Well, authorizing means they didn't have the power before, and this bill, if passed as it is going to give that new power. So we could get used to using the word authorizing in a very easy way, but that's real information to know and to pick apart to see, well then wait a minute, if they didn't already have that power, what power did they have? And that's why it's important to know how to go to the law. So anyway, that's the summary. Then it tells you if it is making any changes to current law by adding, repealing, or repealing and reenacting with new language, that will be referred to here. Sometimes it's all new language, or it's a bill that actually directs an entity to do something. It's not necessarily like creating work group for implementation of Common Core. That was not putting new language in a law. So this is adding to the education article in section 2205 and 4111, So you want to be able to know how to go to 2205 and 4111 to see, wait a minute, where are those in my skeleton structure and what language is there now, and then I'll show you how we look at old language versus new. And in this case, by repealing and reenacting a section, which is Education Article Section 7203. And okay, so be it enacted by the General Assembly that now this is going to be the new language. So notice this right here. That's our first section of law that they're dealing with. This is in the Education Article, Section 2205.1. So that was the first one that they told us right here, Section 2205.1. Now notice we're going to go to this one because there wasn't much to be added to that part. This next paragraph is, or this next section is going to be changing the law in this section. Notice the capital letters versus upper and lowercase letters. The all caps is the new language for the law. Follow certain rules in order to be able to testify. I'm going to go to the ways and means. Each committee has a page like this, and it's very helpful. You can find out a lot of information here. In this case, this is Chairman Sheila Hickson. She's been the chairman of 35 plus years of this singular committee. She makes the rules. She can, and just in this case, this particular chair, each committee will allow 2 to 3 minutes testimony. They will tell you on their page, but that can be changed by the chairperson at will.
Is there a right to be, is there a right to testify as a citizen, or is that at the discretion of the committee chairman?
No, either the law and the Constitution requires that there be citizen input. Probably more Maryland law can take what's in the Constitution.
Take out of a hat?
So they have to allow some testimony, but do they have to allow everyone to testify who wants to, or how does that work?
No, certainly I've been in there when hundreds and hundreds of people were waiting, and they just said, everybody in the room who's for this or who's against this. Sometimes people sign up and their name doesn't show up on the roster. It's kind of interesting how that happens. Now it's electronic signing up out front. You do need, but that still can, my name wasn't on there when I was signed in to testify, so things happen. You do need to be there in advance. There are many things, and that's what I'm going to show us here. The committee, each committee has its own rules as to how the public may testify. If you go down on that committee's homepage, witness guidelines and committee FAQs, each committee, you should definitely read the one that you're planning to testify in front of. So you have public hearings are written there. It tells about the testimony. You need to submit written testimony if you want it to go into the record. That record actually gets filed away, hard copies, and can be looked up by citizens down the road. I have gone in and looked at last year's and the years before's record. Once they keep them for 1 year in the committee office, then they send them over to the Department of Legislative Services, which is close to the State House there. You can see them there in the reference library or wherever they're directed. So it's important to go ahead and do written testimony if you are able, but you still may do just oral testimony in the committee. And
do they transcribe that, and do they transcribe that and put that in the record too?
They won't. No, they're not there to help the citizen do anything. So it's good to know what you need to do. At the least, if you can go down and testify in person, that's encouraging to the legislators who might at least be willing to understand what needs to be analyzed from your perspective. It gives you an opportunity to also talk with those legislators sometimes. Once you've been down there and they've seen your face, if you're able to stay for the committee hearing to be over and catch that legislator in the hall, and most of them are very agreeable to talking to people. They're glad to have citizens come there. They have tight schedules too. But then you can further reiterate what you were talking about, and it's all just good because these legislators are facing 2,700 bills per 90-day session. So that's an awful lot of material to, you know, have to come across. And even the most careful legislator who might think of his or herself, as one who agrees with you on the role of education, government in education, and therefore how that gets made into a law and how that affects the classroom, even those most well-meaning, careful legislators have much facing them and may not be able to spend the same kind of time that you might spend on considering, wait a minute, how is this bill language really affecting what's going on? And so they need that input, and we have found that they're grateful for it. We've been able to affect change by staying at it, not giving up, because it can become intimidating. We can assume that, well, they must know, maybe they won't be taking so kindly to me saying anything about it, but it's been very helpful. It's been very encouraging when they say, you know what, you're right, I didn't realize that. Right.
And what you were showing was so valuable too, because quite often the challenge, it sounds reasonable to ordinary people that's posed to legislators is, did you read the bill?
Right.
Well, actually reading the bill might not be so helpful to a legislator, because all it says is, this particular part of the code of law has changed in this manner. This particular, and so you actually have to have the book or the site open and compare back and forth.
Exactly.
And so
yes.
actually reading the text of the bill actually might not be as informative to them as reading an analysis either prepared by their own staff or someone like us who could say, this is what it actually does. This is the difference that it makes. Because reading the lines of the bill, especially if it's a big bill, it won't mean anything to anyone unless they're actually looking at the effect that it has on the statute as a bill.
And I would just like to add another reason that it's important to go down there and testify in person is that a lot of times, I mean, we can submit written testimony, and like Cindy said, that's important to do, but a lot of legislators never read that. So when you're standing there in front of them in committee, they can't get escape from that. They're going to hear that, and sometimes that's all they're going to hear.
So, there's written testimony. Well, in this case, Ways and Means, she says all written testimony, 35 copies. I think sometimes as many as 50 copies have had to be done, or 40 some. So you want to check per committee, and there are times when you can find a legislator whose office will produce those numbers of copies for you and even deliver them to the committee office in time. You need to find out who your local legislator is, call that office ahead of time and see if they would be amenable to it. Republican versus Democrat might figure into it. I suggest you try all different avenues. If you do not give written testimony to the committee office, and they want it probably an hour ahead of time. I'm not going to read all the fine print right now, but it has to usually be submitted by 12 noon. You have to sign up by 12 noon. Otherwise, it does not go in the folders, and it does not for that bill, and it does not get distributed to each one of the legislators. Theoretically, each one of those legislators has a copy of your written testimony while you're talking. They may refer to it, they may not. If you just call or if you just email them, that is not testimony. That is input. It's good to do. But it will never go on the record. It's never entered into the committee discussion per se. So realize that the written testimony is important and the oral testimony is important.
Are you obligated to read verbatim what you submitted?
Thank you. They prefer you not read. They prefer, and some of the chair people will even say that to you. They listen to testimonies every day, and they want, well, I won't say that, but the more natural and knowledgeable of your subject, the better you will come off and the more attention you'll get. It's good, in my opinion, well, there are varying content ways that you can decide to use your testimony time, but it is good to make sure you've read the bill carefully, understand its ramifications, so that however you decide to give input or whatever your comments are, it doesn't turn out that you really didn't address the content of the bill and they knew what the law said, but your testimony wasn't related to anything they were doing in the law. So thanks, Mrs. Smith, you know, we're glad you gave your input. And sure, we sat here and took it, but it really, you didn't present us with any evidence or even anything that we can consider that would cause us to change our opinion of this bill.
One more thing.
Yes.
In both your written testimony and your verbal, like Cindy said, you're gonna have 2 or 3 minutes. You want to practice your verbal testimony, make sure that you're within that time frame. Your written also, you do not want to get wordy. You do not hand them 50 pages of written testimony. They will not read it. You want bullet points. You want something that a legislator who has to deal with almost 3,000 bills that session can look and see what you're saying. So if you really want to get a message across, you've got to make it simple.
Would you know in advance what ones are coming up regarding
You
Uncore?
will not know until the first day of the session, as far as going online and being able to look up bills. Okay, let me finish with committee a minute. So if you are on the committee office, you can, webpage, you can call them with these phone numbers. You can find out a lot of information there. Click on membership. You will see which legislators are in that committee. Don't worry about the subcommittees. You testify before the full committee. You can see there's the chair and the vice chair, and then various legislators that are there. As for the schedule, and you can click on each one of those to get their contact information and any other information if you'd like to find out something that might be of use to you. So, of course, there is no schedule right now for the whole session because last year's session is over, 2014, 2015 is not up yet. So there's very little here, but this is where you can find the committee schedule. Now, let me go back. I'm going to go off committees for a minute because I'm still on your thought. Okay, schedules. This is from the home page, of course, of the website. That second tab is schedules. You will be able to find committee schedules there. So none of this is available right now, of course.
If the
Now-
delegate or senator from your district is not on a committee, as a practical matter, do you get to testify? Because there's no one that represents you, there's no one that's going to say, oh, sure, you're from my area, come on in, you know, I'll advocate for you, make sure you get to testify. I mean, will you get shut out as a practical matter?
No, no, no. The whole structure is that these legislators are assigned to given committees, and the committee each has a duty over certain subject matter bills. So it's normal that whichever Maryland citizens want to testify on a bill, they're not looking for your legislator to be there. That's a good time to go visit your legislators. I want to show us a couple of things here. Legislation by session is that third tab up there. Well, let me go back. Here we are on the home page. You can see that right here, find legislation by number or by broad subject. That is the current session. So right now they still show 2014 bills, but once the session starts, it'll be 2015. So the only way you can go back to find find bills from last year, because some of the bills will say in the fiscal and policy note, this bill was tried under XYZ number last year. You might want to refer to it for one reason or another. So you look up legislation by session. What you can see right here is change session. So let's say we're going to go to I'm going to go to 2010. All right? You have to wait for it to refresh, and that seems to be a problem sometimes. I'm going to type in SB 275. That's one of my favorite bills. And that is the Maryland Longitudinal Tax System, I think. Yes. So you can see, that's the title of that. That is where the grant money from the federal was then given the pathway to be funneled into creating the Maryland Longitudinal Data System officially. And that was in 2010. So this is a 2010 bill, but all the information is still here. So you'll be able to click through the various links that are there in order to find out what language was in the bill and what it did to the law. So you'll see you'll have the Senate bill in this case, which, by the way, when you type in numbers, if it's a Senate bill, it's SB and the number, no space in between. If it's a House bill, it's HB and the number, no space in between. Again, there are usually about 2,700 bills per session. I haven't kept tabs the last couple of years, but 900 bills easily can pass each year. So that's 900 new restrictions and powers of government in the state of Maryland alone each year. That's with a 90-day legislature. This chapter number, once it passes both houses, gets signed, it becomes law. And that is the chapter for that year's laws that got passed. So the language usually doesn't change between these various bills, but I'll try to show you where language does change, because these are past years and just the way that they show here. And by the way, let me scroll down the page. You can still see which committee it was heard in, right here, Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs. It passed 43-3. That means 3 senators out of all 47 voted against this Maryland longitudinal data system. 43 voted for. That is not party lines, and that's what you'll find very often on many of the bills. So even conservative, liberal, they need educating on what the bill does and what U.S. citizens believe should be. If you go down to documents, you can find the way the bill first was worded, first reading, the way it was amended on the House or Senate floor, the way it was enrolled and made into law. The fiscal and policy note, very important to look for once it comes up on any bill page. You can find the votes, you can find the amendments, committee votes, the Senate committee votes. If you go to this document here, and these pertain whatever year it happens, it's just a little bit different page. There, the PDFs are how they show the committee votes, and you can find that the vote was called for, a motion to give a favorable with amendment vote in this case. Always look for which motion was made up here, because you may think, oh, he voted against it. Well, no, he voted against giving it a favorable report, or he voted against giving it an unfavorable report. So you have to look at what's up there. So 3 legislators in committee voted to give against giving it a favorable report, and the rest of the legislators, 6 of them, voted to give it a favorable report. So 6-3, they won. B 607. This was about cloud computing. This was an interesting bill. This is a bill that serves as a great example of things are not what they appear to be. Always read, double read, talk to others about it, check the law, and try to think, what do I believe the role of government should be, and what do I think is already going on in the schools, etc. So in this bill, okay, we have the bill language up here, and you can usually click on that, but you need to know which reading of the bill that is. This bill, in this case, did have some amendments. So I'm going to scroll down here. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to documents, because that's going to give me several versions of the bill. So if you see text first, that is the first reading of the bill. That's how it was introduced. There's under it text third.
Did it tell you how it changed, or do you have to compare?
Well, we'll look at it. Thank you. But notice it even has a different name. So in this case, the bill was retitled. So in this case, this went through a committee process, a hearing. It got dealt with in the hearing and amended. This might have been amendments either in the committee, I think it was, not on the floor. This bill did not ultimately pass. The original bill, the Student Privacy and Cloud Computing Act. Notice the language here. This is the summary. For the purpose of what? Authorizing certain educational institutions to use certain cloud computing services, etc. This bill was presented by this legislator to conservative legislators, to all kinds of responsible people in both parties, parents, educators, as protecting students and families, protecting their data, protecting their information, protecting them. The truth is, it gave a new power to the school systems that they did not currently have written in law. They were using it, but nobody had yet dealt with it. And one of our objections was that, wait a minute, aside from all the other maybe protections it's putting in here, first of all, it's authorizing, and we had to do a lot of talking to legislators to get them to realize that, or to feel like they were understanding that. And as it turned out, the fiscal and policy note and the statement actually says that, and the legislative services agreed with that. It was authorizing. We were against that because that issue hadn't even been discussed with parents. So cloud systems and computer software are already being used in the schools. Now's a good time for a wake-up call for parents to say, wait a minute, let's revisit, is the school using them? What is my child being involved in? What are the arrangements, the contracts that the school individually has arranged with the third party? Because already certain agreements have been made in that contract where the third party gets the information, a variety of information. So it's important to even decide whether you want those powers in the hands of the Department of Ed or whether it needs to have other restrictions.
I just want to add on something to this. This bill would have flown through. We had almost all legislators completely signing on, co-sponsoring this bill from both parties. Lawyers, longtime legislators, they looked at the summary and they thought it was a good thing until we started saying, wait a minute, slow down. And so this is an example of how two moms can affect legislation that our legislators are, just pushing through because it's an education bill, and they don't want to be thought of as anti-education. What we need to do is set up a committee in the DCCEO whose job it is to monitor education-related bills. So we want to do the reading for our legislators. They can't read them all. They don't have the time to read them all. So we want to be a labor force for them. And additionally, we're looking at things and able to see things that they don't recognize because they're not as familiar with all these reforms. That's why Cindy went through that list of reforms. It's not just Common Core, it's all these other reforms too. And we're able to pick up on things. Wait a minute, this line item in this one bill, this is not just authorizing, but this is laying groundwork for this next reform. We can see it. And we want to clue our legislators into that. Sometimes education-related bills don't even go through the education subcommittees for the hearings. It might be in budget and taxation because there's some line item in some bill that affects education, but it's going through a different committee. So I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I'm going to just try to show, you won't have to remember any particulars here. But this is the same bill, once the first version and then the second version with amendments. It's changed its title, Student Privacy and Cloud Computing Act, to Student Data Privacy Act of 2014. And so it will show you on the bill what all these different markings are. They struck some language and it tells you down at the bottom here, I realize this is all fine print, but it tells that these are matters stricken from the bill by amendment through that committee process on the floor. Underlining, which is what some of this is here, means that that's language that got added during the amendment process. So it wasn't part of the original bill, it got added. And then brackets is actually in the original bill. I'm not sure where to show you that, but when they have brackets, that is language that's currently in law, but now they're going to take it out by this bill if it passes as it is. So you have all those helps there on the bottom of the front page, which will tell you what you're looking at. You just kind of have to keep referring to it until you get used to it. I'd like to show you that you can watch or listen to committee hearings because that's helpful first time around or whatever, especially, again, you can't get down to Annapolis to testify for one reason or another on a given bill. At least you can see what happened, and they archive these things. So We are on the bill page for HB 607 right now. I'm back to summary rather than documents or history. I'm on the summary. So if I go down here to committees, then the Ways and Means Committee heard it. I don't want to click on that, but I do want to click on that little video symbol. Well, that's going to take me to the video of the hearing that occurred for that bill. I've watched it live, I've watched it archived. And actually, one wonderful thing they're doing now, if you go to the audio from the bill rather than from the committee link, it usually I've noticed that they must be doing updates. I don't think that some of the hearings aren't showing right now, the audio and the video. But you normally, in that opening box down there, will be able to see the video. You normally see the person who's testifying, and then you can also see when they use the camera that shows which legislator might be asking questions or the chairperson. That's very helpful. But anyway, they usually locate per bill. If you access it from the bill page, they'll put you right in the place in the video where that bill testimony is starting. So that's very helpful because I've listened to 5 hours, so you probably have too, of testimony or hunting for that bill. It is a lot of material, but if you just start poking around this Maryland General Assembly webpage and those law pages, I mean, different times, just take one bill and try to use it as your excuse to go hunting for that part of the law. And then it's easy to, or it's instructive, it helps. If you're testifying in person, I'll take my written testimony, here, which is in a certain format because it has to be in such a way, like it has certain labeling at the top, which committee, whether you're in support of the bill or opposed to the bill, and then I address it, Madam Chair and members of the committee, or I guess it's Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And then I put my full name and address and contact information on the bottom of it. It could be pages long. It could have attachments to it, whatever you want to do. But then what I do for my verbal testimony is I make it bigger, I make spaces. I'm knowing as different people are testifying, I don't need to say that point because somebody else said it, or I'm going to say it a little different way. So I scribble, and then that is helpful to have your own version and to be ready to take your 2-minute version or 3-minute, whatever they said on their FAQ page per committee, and boil it down to 30 seconds so that you're ready if they have you do that. Because this stuff goes on whether we get involved or not, and it affects every part of our lives. 900 laws in each year. I mean, that's different each year, but it's a lot of laws. So now we know. And I found, again, back in the early 90s, government is very complicated, and it would be hard to feel like you knew where to start beginning to learn and why you should learn certain parts, etc. It's always good to have a cause. That cause will drive your trail. By following that trail and learning the things you need to do for that, you learn the whole government structure. So it doesn't mean you're a master of all knowledge, but it really is very useful as a tool to enable you to know what your government does and how to be an involved citizen. I'll speak out of the way. Why don't you?
She's amazing. I learned from Cindy this past session. I mean, I had testified county level, but I had never testified state level before, and I learned from Cindy, and you can learn quickly, if you have the right person to guide you. So that's our goal here, is to develop some people who have an interest, have a cause, and get educated on how the process works and what we need to do, and are willing to go forward and do.
How to have that hand holding so it isn't, because if I just sat here and never done it, I'd be like, I'm not doing that. There's no way. But so that I want to know more about this actual group and how it can help hold hands.
Well, I'm hoping that, as we leave here today, I'll be in touch with people, say, are you interested in a committee, a legislative committee involved in this? And that's where the main education is given. I mean, that's where people really don't mean, we all can write an opt-out letter pretty simply, that, that kind of stuff, but this is where we really need a concerted education effort to the public. And I'm hoping that we can continue and maybe do this was 101, maybe we can do a 201 for those people that say, yes, I'm willing to go forward with this and get involved and get geared up for this session. So we have until December. Because really, bills start being entered in December. You can submit early bills. We gotta be ready by then.
So, like, is there anybody else who's like helping you full time, or like, is it, you're hoping that we're gonna be doing that too? I mean, I totally think we can be doing that. I want to know what's already there.
There's people who have definitely stepped up and volunteered to help out with various things, but it's more, this is very organic. This is true grassroots. It's just people. We're inviting the public at large. Whoever steps up, steps up. It's a thing.
And can I say, it is happening in other counties. So where little clusters develop here, know that it's also happening in meaningful ways in other counties. So that is exponential and it is organic. And last year, we experienced that kind of group. We had several people that we could count on, and it was so good to have somebody sitting there with you, several people, as well as helping each other kind of tweak our testimonies or thoughts.
Annie, I have a question. So I really sincerely believe there's a lot of parents that do not know that what's happening in the school system. And I keep trying to put the word out, and I put it on Facebook and things like that. And some of the parents, when I talk to them, they're like, well, all I know is that it's going to prepare my kids for college and stuff like that. And they just don't believe what's actually happening. And then when I try to tell them about it, they're almost afraid. And then when I tell the principals and the teachers, they're like, well, the PTA people, they are like, oh, well, I'll forward this information to the principal. And the principal's not going to let the word out because, and so I'm like, last night I was at this little bonfire and I was telling this mom about it, and she was like, my school doesn't teach that. And I go, well, what school does your daughter go to? She goes, S6 Elementary. I'm like, yes, she does. And she was like, no, I don't think so. They're doing math a little bit different, but, and I'm like, I'm trying to convince this lady that, yes, it's happening, but they just don't get it. And it's like, I don't know what to do as a parent because I want to pass out flyers at the school and everything, but I don't want to be like the troublemaker at the school. So what do you suggest?
Start being the troublemaker.
Well, I was doing this. I was passing this out, and some of the moms that were in my Tyler before, they were there, and I was telling them, but they were actually almost afraid. When I was telling them, they were like afraid to talk about it. Like, okay, I was like, well, just give me your email, and then I'll just send you some information. And they were like, yeah. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's going to be people like that, and there's people who are not going to be a help to us. So move on.
Yeah.
And find other people that are willing to do something and stand up for their kids.
Yeah.
This is our kids. My advice on that, and I'll get to you in a second, is you can spin your wheels for a long time trying to convince people.
Yeah.
Don't even have that in your head. We're not here to convince people to think our way.
Yeah.
We're here to present the information and people will decide. And then we can reach the people that are like-minded.
Yeah.
This is one good reason for forming groups because no one person can do everything. But if you do things in a coordinated way, it has more power.
Well, that's why I like
So if you can write letters to the editor, letters to specific school personnel, but also send them as letters to the editor stating that you sent it.